Buonasera, my name is Lillo Guarneri and I am the Director of Italian Cultural Institute and Cultural Attaché of Italian Consulate General here in Sydney. The Istituto Italiano di Cultura is a cultural office of the Consulate whose mission is the promotion of Italian language and culture through the organization of courses, concerts, exhibition, lecture, music reading, etc. Unfortunately, due to the outgoing restriction imposed by the COVID pandemic, most of our exciting events had to be moved again to online format, such as tonight's webinar. As we all know, Italy was the first country after China to suffer the tremendous effect of the COVID pandemic. Fortunately, in 2021, Italy has bounced back from those dark times, and it's currently one of the first world nations with some of the highest rate of vaccination. Italy has also achieved quite a few outstanding results, some very popular. For example, the victory at the Eurovision Song Contest, the European Cup, soccer and volley, near win at the Wimbledon tennis tournament, several prestigious medals at the Olympic and important at Paralympics Games. The mood is now quite positive. Italians have returned to an almost normal life. And finally, the economy is recovering and the tourists have returned in droves. How has Italy changed and which role is it playing in the post-pandemic world? Which aspect of our country are Australians less familiar with? To discuss this topic from different perspectives, we have invited the Ambassador of Italy, Francesca Tardioli, and the Consul General of Italy in Sydney, Andrea De Felipe, to give an introductory speech. This will be followed by a conversation between Gabriele Abbondanza, researcher and lecturer at the University of Sydney and associate fellow at the Italian Institute of International Affairs, Tania Walker, doctoral research at the University of Sydney, and the Ambassador Ferdinando Nelli Feroci from Rome, currently president of Italian Institute of International Affairs. During the webinar, the audience will be able to send their question, which will be answered by the panelists at the end of the conference. I also thank the Italian Senator Francesco Giacobbe, who is attending from Rome and who will be introduced the Q&A session. Thank you all for attending these events. I welcome again all our guest speakers, and I leave now the virtual floor to the Ambassador of Italy to Australia, Francesca Tardioli. Prego, Ambasciatrice.
Grazie Lillo. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. For those connected from Italy, in particular, to Ambassador Ferdinando Nelli Feroci. Ciao, Ferdinando, so nice to see you again, President of the Italian International Affairs Institute. And thank you very much, Lillo, for organizing this webinar. I think that there are several reasons to look into the topic chosen today. Firstly, because the current pandemic is really a watershed. There is, or better, there was a word we knew before the pandemic, and there will be a word after. And secondly, because actually the role of Italy has so changed into what I believe it's an enhanced role nationally and internationally. The pandemic is not over, unfortunately, but we collectively have reasons to believe that the worst is behind us. And this is possible, that was possible, is being possible, thank you to the incredible efforts of our countries, by the international community as a whole, notably the European Union, which has done a remarkable job, and by scientists all over the world. I want up front to pay tribute to the memory of the millions of victims globally, over 130,000 only in Italy, and to pay tribute to the front carers, nurses, doctors, civil protection officers, volunteers. We must start from here if we want to understand the role of Italy after this tragedy. A role of proactiveness, resilience, leadership, recovery, and vision for the future. In my few minutes, I want just to pass some highlights. First, amidst the pandemic, Italy played a really a key role in shaping the right response at the European Union level, often at the beginning, you might remember that, against the skepticism at that time. But with rational perseverance, good faith, and a solidarity spirit, Italy was one of the driving forces of the more ambitious and decisive European Union action we saw and we see today, not only with regard to the pandemic. We, together other countries, obviously, nothing is possible alone, but we contributed to trigger the recovery package first, and you might remember how difficult the negotiations were at the time, and the broader Next Generation EU. Our role was instrumental to overcome the adversity, to lay down the foundation of a recovery focused at rebuilding our societies better, and to seize the opportunities to impress the necessary acceleration towards a transition to a different model of growth. Italy did not spare its leadership role, not only at the European Union level, but also as a G7 member, and particularly in 2021, as G20 presidency and co-president of the COP26, steering the action of key coalitions so that the international community globally is fit for purpose and able to tackle our common global challenges and global threats. Be it a health threat like the pandemic, or the existential threats posed by climate change, or the security challenges and threats stemming from the vast instability in the world. In different areas and arches of crisis, including Afghanistan, unforeseen, Libya, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on, up to the Indo-Pacific region. Italy is there, it's ready to play its part, fully aware of the challenges we all are facing in the 21st century. Those challenges require strategic international cooperation, or at least concerted actions, starting from a more enhanced European defense. The vision embraced by Italy, as you all know, is enrooted in our indispensable transatlantic relations and within the overarching role of the United Nations. And our leaders are gathering together as we speak, actually, in New York, this time in person, fortunately, for the high-level week of the 76th UNGA, United Nations General Assembly. There are so many different angles and perspectives through which addressing today's topic, for example, the economic angle and some inputs we have seen in the video that preceded the beginning of the webinar, and the role of Italy in the post-pandemic world, including, for instance, the fight against inequalities, or in ensuring free trade and sustained support to our export, or the need to expedite digitalization, and so on. But it's really too much to say in 5 minutes. And so I'll pause here with my initial remarks as a contribution to the discussion, and I'll stand ready to take questions later and to listen carefully and with interest to the speakers that are following. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. I believe that what would be the true impact of the pandemic on human organizations, on our lives, is something that at present time can only be speculated upon. The only certain thing is that the global connectivity at a physical level cannot be taken for granted anymore. People-to-people relations in particular, which are at the core of any basic meaningful exchange between nations, have borne the brunt of the disruption in physical connectivity. And while we look forward to the progressive relaxation of international travel bans and restrictions, we can safely assume that this process will take some time and will look more like a roller coaster than a highway. In this context, the countries that before the pandemic have built more, have invested more in building bridges, have invested more in increasing, diversifying, and developing their connectivity with other countries at the people-to-people level especially, will be better equipped, I believe, to face the new tremendous challenges of the post-pandemic world. And I believe Italy is one of those countries. And our first and most formidable bridges are our communities abroad. We tend to look at human capital flight as in traditional terms, in the traditional terms of the dichotomy brain drain, brain gain. That's, I believe, an oversimplification that fails to recognize the benefits for the sending country and focuses only on the benefits of the receiving country. Yet it shouldn't be considered a zero-sum game. It is not a zero-sum game. From my observatory, I can offer 3 examples, but I could offer many more. My first example is Franco Belgiorno-Nettis. In 1951, 2 Italian immigrants, 2 engineers, Franco Belgiorno-Nettis and Carlos Salteri, came to Australia under a short-term contract to do only one thing, to set up an electric power transmission infrastructure company. They went on to create Transfield, which was a hugely successful company that would revolutionize Australia's corporate and business environment for years to come. Franco Belgiorno-Nettis would also become a patron of the arts and a cultural powerhouse and proved to be pivotal to the establishment of a thriving contemporary art scene, the Sydney Biennale, for example, with deep connection with the Italian contemporary art scene. Let's mention, for example, the Australia Pavilion at the Biennale of Venezia. Today, his legacy is continued by the Belgiorno-Nettis family, by Franco's children, namely Luca Belgiorno-Nettis. My second example is Paolo Totaro. Paolo Totaro too came to Australia as an immigrant for a short term, what was supposed to be a short term, under a contract with Fiat in 1963. He went on to become the founding chairman of New South Wales Ethnic Affairs Commission, a role that he would hold until 1989. In 1977, on invitation by the then Premier of New South Wales, Neville Bryan, he chaired an inquiry into ethnic affairs. The challenge was to define, for the first time in Australia, the principles of multiculturalism in the practice of government and put them into action in schools, hospitals, courts of law, workplaces, and many other aspects of our common living. The report that resulted from that inquiry, which had the title Participation, is still considered today as the Bible, the primary source of reference from where all following public discourse on multiculturalism would flourish. Paolo was born in 1933, still an indefatigable bridge builder between our 2 cultures, having recently successfully lobbied the Workers' Education Association to include Dante Divina Commedia in English among its current courses. Carla Zampatti is my third and final example. Carla sadly passed away recently in tragic circumstances, had migrated to Australia as a child with her family and grew up in a small mining town in Western Australia in 1950. It was a time still strongly characterized by the white Australia policy when Italian immigrants were not considered white enough. Carla used to recall that her teacher told her that Zampatti, a family name, was simply too foreign for the local Australian taste. It was a name that would become Australia's most iconic fashion brand. A unique Italianità became a hallmark in reshaping Australian fashion landscape. She was a trailblazer with incredible with many more examples. This evening itself, this evening conversation led by Gabriele Abbondanza, another bridge builder between Italy and Australia, being a further example. But I will conclude here by saying that whatever is or whatever will be Italy's role in the new world after the pandemic, as institutions, we should aim at making the best of our bridge builders, engaging them and being engaged by them as much as we can. Also with some creativity beyond the traditional and sometimes fatigued organizations and platforms available at institutional level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Consul General, and thanks for the interesting introduction and for the perfect time. Now I pass the microphone to Gabriele. Professor Abbondanza, prego.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to this webinar after the pandemic, Italy's place in the world. It is really a joy to have you all here, even though under normal circumstances, we would see each other face to face. Before anything else, I would like to thank Ambassador Francesca Tardioli and Consul General Andrea De Filippo for their really excellent introductions and fascinating insights on both accounts. Let me also thank you, the director of the Italian Cultural Institute in Sydney, Lillo Guarnieri, without whom this conference would not have been possible. And I would also like to acknowledge Fabio Panuzzo, Paola Vertecchi, Danilo Sidari, Silvia Gardin for their stellar organization. Since we are doing this, I would also like to extend my gratitude to Talia Walker, a brilliant Australian researcher in Italian studies who will be interviewing me and Ambassador Nelly Feroci in this conference. She will also be moderating the Q&A at the end of the conference. And of course, I would like to extend my gratitude to Ambassador Ferdinando Nelly Feroci himself, which is now the president of the Italian Institute of International Affairs. He joins us from Rome and will intervene later on. And since this is an online conference and regrettably we do not get to see each other face to face, this is what we look like in real life. So hopefully after the 18th of October in Australia, at least we will be able to resume normal activities safely.
Thank you so much, Gabriele, and thank you everybody for having me tonight. First of all, Gabriele, to begin this talk, I want to ask why this conference and why Italy?
Interesting and significant question. We are all acutely aware of just how much the COVID-19 pandemic has shaken the world, and this map unfortunately should suffice. The color intensity shows the number of victims of COVID-19. And there is even more to that. There are so many things that we do not know yet. And a research that has been recently published and funded by The Economist has revealed the number of actual people that have lost their lives due to COVID-19, as opposed to the official figures that states have published. And as we can see, we are talking about a massive difference. And what is even sadder is that developing states are disproportionately affected by what has happened with the pandemic. Even when it comes to official figures, this is what has been happening. And Italy still today is the 9th country by number of victims among increasingly under control thanks to two different sets of measures. First of all, vaccines, and secondly, so-called non-pharmaceutical policies and measures such as the Green Pass or the COVID passport, if you will. Now, talking about the vaccines, 3/4 of the Italian population at this stage have received the first dose, and 2/3 of the entire population, therefore including children, has received the second dose. We are already administering third doses. These are some of the highest rates in the world. Now, this doesn't mean that people do not die because of this virus anymore. Unfortunately, that happens. And the very abundant data that we have, thanks to the Italian Health Institute, show that the median age so far has been 82, and that the vaccines are what make the difference. You can see here in purple the people who are tragically losing their lives today still. And the vast majority of them are people who have not received the vaccine. The second measure that I was referring to is the Italian Green Pass, basically a COVID passport, and that certifies that people have either been vaccinated, tested negative, or recovered from COVID-19. And that provides a safe environment for everyone. And these are just some of the activities that you can do today in Italy if you have a Green Pass. You can go out and do some shopping, you can go to the restaurant, you can watch your team at the stadium, you can go to the gym, you can even travel, as long as you have a Green Pass, which shows and certifies that you are not a threat to your community as well as to yourself. And this has been paying off so far. There is a strong economic recovery, 6% GDP growth for this year, and an additional 4% has been estimated for next year. So, in other words, a safe and regulated environment, of course, in conjunction with like-minded states, brings a brighter future. And this is what Dr. Anthony Fauci from the US, of course, has said just last week, and I'm quoting, "Italy is doing well, better than the United States. Now you are an example for the world." So to answer your question, Talia, Italy is a country that suffered greatly, and we do not need to be reminded of that at the beginning of the pandemic, but it is also a country that is experiencing a very significant recovery, and also a safe recovery for everyone. As a result, Italy, I argue, is a very, very good example of how, not just how to live in a post-pandemic world, but also how to shape a post-pandemic world.
Fantastic, thank you. That's a great introduction to where Italy is at the moment in the current situation. And I suppose my next question is, in thinking about Italy, what's the image that we have in our minds? What picture do we associate with Italy?
Another interesting question. I suppose that we can resort to the usual stereotypes. We can resort to the general knowledge that we have of Italy as a country. We usually think of the country, the land itself, and we have here on the left a photo of hills in Tuscany. At the center, we have the stunning coastline of the Amalfi Coast and its astonishing mountains, in particular, the Dolomites on the right. We also think, and of course this is the case, about its culture, its history, the ancient cities, the ancient monuments, museums everywhere. And we have the Roman Forum here on the left, Pisa, clearly in the middle, and the famous Uffizi Gallery in the right. And we are usually also fascinated by its society, its lifestyle, but also its food and wine culture, and everything that comes associated with that. Now, all of this is very nice and well. There is no denying that this is significant and very much there when we talk and think about Italy. Yet, Italy is also a highly influential country in a vast number of areas. And this is what I hope we'll be able to achieve with this conference, a greater awareness of what these fields are.
Brilliant, thank you, thank you. And as someone just noted in the comments, very beautiful.
Culture and with history. Now, what we usually refer to when we think of Italian culture and history is at best the Romans, maybe the Etruscans even before. In reality, Italian history and Italian culture dates back to 4,500 years ago. And this beautiful ancient monument that I've put here in my slide is the Barumini Nuraghe. This is a construction that dates back to the Bronze Age from the Nuragic civilization in Sardinia. little known, and yet there are so many gems, undervalued, if you will, gems such as this one. Now, this has paid off for quite a lot of time. Right before the beginning of the pandemic, Italy was the 5th most visited country globally. It was on track to overtake China. And then, of course, we all know what happened with 2020. At the same time, and this was mentioned in the video at the beginning of this conference, Italy has the largest number of UN World Heritage Sites. And this graph that you see here is updated to the recent updates that the UN has published in July and August of this year. So I suppose that since we are discussing the cultural and the historical part of the country first, it is good also for our eyes, since we cannot really travel that much here in Australia. It is good to have a look at a selection of them, starting with the south of Italy. We have the Reggia di Caserta, which is the largest royal palace in the world, a joy to behold, and it has also been recently renovated, both inside and in its stunning gardens. We have the Valley of Temples in Sicily, which does not just have 7 such temples, but also innumerable other monuments. It would be impossible not to mention Pompeii, of course. It is nearly 200 acres big, and yet the amazing thing is that on a yearly basis, this changes because archaeologists keep discovering more and more. So it will not be the same if you keep visiting every year. And then from the Apulia region, another little known gem, this is Castel de Monte, a castle from the 13th century, and it has stunning architectural features that are little known even in Italy itself. From the central part of the country, from central Italy, it would be impossible not to mention Rome, of course, and its historic center, which, think about this, is 5 times as big as Sydney CBD. We're talking about 15 square kilometers of monuments, and we also know how many layers the historic center of Rome possesses. Then if we move to Tuscany, we have the necropolis of Cerveteri from the 9th century, again, very, very little known even in Italy. And why not talking about the Marche region, an undervalued gem in central Italy, and this is the beautiful historic center of Urbino, and in particular the Palazzo Ducale. While this is the Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, which despite its huge mammoth proportions was completed almost 8 centuries ago. If we move to the north of Italy, especially here in Australia, it would be peculiar not to mention the Cinque Terre and their stunning and picturesque coastline. And this is another little known gem, the Valcamonica rock drawings. Now, the oldest among these date back to 10,000 years ago. And this is the largest collection of rock drawings in the world. It is incredible to behold. And once again, they keep discovering more and more about this. Venice and its lagoon, another stunning UN World Heritage. And then perhaps what is little known, especially here in Australia, this is the Langhe region in Piedmont, and if you do not know it, I suggest that you take and buy an airplane ticket as soon as you can, as soon as it is safe to do so, because we owe to this region some of the most sophisticated wines in the world, Barolo, Barbaresco, Nebbiolo, as well as the great white truffle of Alba. So, long story short, I assume that it is very safe to say that Italy's culture is its best known strength. And we also have quite a lot of metrics that confirm this. The cultural influence indicator that assesses how much a country has had an impact globally from a cultural viewpoint ranks Italy first. The soft power ranking has dubbed Italy a cultural superpower, and it mentions, and I'm quoting here, its timeless cultural assets, the global omnipresence of Italian cuisine, and its iconic, internationally renowned luxury brands. And another little known fact, Italian movies rank first by number of Oscars for foreign language movies, ahead of comparable countries such as France, Spain, and many others that do not have English as a first language. So once again, yes, there is good reason for the image of Italy as a cultural country, but there is also rather more besides, as we shall see later on.
Perfect, thank you. There's definitely that really strong cultural impact of a very rich culture, very rich history. Earlier, you mentioned some lesser known assets of Italy. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about those now.
By all means, and this is, I hope, the most interesting part of this conference. Now, I would like to start by putting things into perspective. Italy has, and this is probably one of the many little known things about the country, Italy has one of the largest economies in the world. To be precise, it has the 8th largest economy in the world out of around 200 countries. And this is important because this affects what the country can do in a variety of fields, of course. First of all, it is the 3rd largest holders of gold reserves on the planet. This is, of course, a product of its very long history. Now, this map here is drawn to scale, so you can just begin to imagine just how much gold that is in there, and it is worth a whopping $112 billion. More on this, Italy is the 7th largest manufacturing country, a country that produces things and then exports them, and it is ahead of comparable countries like France and the UK, but it is also ahead of rising Asian giants such as Indonesia. Even more interestingly, I think, if we look at what the country produces and exports, what we usually associate to Italy, the food, the wine, the luxury textile brands, they're not the most exported items. Metal products rank 1st, machinery and equipment rank 2nd, then plastic products rank 4th. To be sure, there is also food and beverage and textile, but they're not the 1st nor the 2nd item that Italy produces and exports. And this is probably even more surprising for those of us who do not deal with Italian foreign policy. Italy has even top 10 military capabilities. Just to bring about a couple of examples, it is one of the only 3 countries globally to operate 2 aircraft carriers, and a 3rd one will start active service next year. And here they are, we have aircraft carrier Cavour on the left and aircraft carrier Garibaldi on the right. Now, what do we do with such large and capable armored forces? Well, they are generally used for humanitarian missions, for peacekeeping operations, quite a lot about that, and anti-piracy missions with allies and partners, especially within NATO. But if need be, they also deploy advanced military aircraft. More on this, Italy was last year in 2020 the 7th largest arms exporter globally, a very, very high-tech defense industry. And it is also the country with the 11th largest military budget in order to be able to conduct so many peacekeeping operations overseas. And hopefully this is even more interesting if we take a look, a much wider look from the space, no less. We discover something that was hinted at in the video at the beginning of this conference. Italy has leading space capabilities. It was the 3rd country in history to operate its own satellite in 1964. It is one of the very few countries to cover the whole space supply chain, and that means research and design, production, deployment, exports, maintenance of satellites, the lot. There are over 200 companies involved in the Italian space economy, and this means that the country has both civil and research purpose, but also military goals as well, surveillance, for example. And this has led to the creation of a strong Italian space economy, which shouldn't be news here in Australia, because after all, since the very inception of the Australian Space Agency in 2018, the Italian Space Agency, which dates back quite a lot more, has been there to support it with technological and scientific transfer. And courtesy of the Italian Space Agency itself, these are some of the most important cooperation projects with both the American and the European space agencies, NASA and ESA. And as we can see, both in the near past, the present, and the near future, we are talking about very significant projects with ESA and NASA. On top of this, we are talking about a country that has a tradition of international cooperation, a tradition of not doing things by itself. Italy has the 9th largest diplomatic network, and I'm glad that we have both the ambassador and the consul general here with us tonight. And it is quite easy to measure the extent of a diplomatic network. You simply count the number of embassies and consulates, and this places Italy on par with Japan. It has membership, but rather more often founding membership of the world's main organizations, and here are some of them. And it has membership to elite forums such as the G7, the NATO Quinta, the 5 most capable countries within NATO, the EU Treaty, 3 largest countries within the European Union. And it has very, very advanced and strong cultural diplomacy. Between Dante Alighieri societies and Italian cultural institutes, there are 550 posts globally. And we can probably gauge what that means since we are having this conference hosted by an Italian cultural institute. It has the there we are. I think that I lost it for a second. And it has the 4th most powerful passport globally, on par with Australia and other states. And this measures how many countries the citizen of that particular state can visit without even asking for a visa. And that gives you an idea of the friendliness of that particular country's international relations. So all of this, at the end of the day, means that Italy is a country that even today, in 2021, has global interest, but it is a country with a cooperative approach to international affairs and to international problems as well. More on things that probably are not so well known when Italy is concerned. Italy is the #1 peacekeeper among all developed states. And when I mean #1 peacekeeper, I refer to both the number of troops that it deploys to stabilize volatile regions and also the number of missions it leads. And this that you can see here is a map that I drew myself last year for research that was published last year. And you can see where Italy is providing its significant peacekeeping efforts. Central and Northern Africa, very, very significantly, but also the Middle East and Western Asia, not to mention the Mediterranean itself, of course. This shows a commitment to a rules-based order where states, all states, know that the international law is the guiding principle for global affairs. It is also one of the main financial contributors to these international organizations. I have put a selection of organizations here, and we have the EU, NATO, the OECD, the UN, and others still. And on average, Italy is the 5th largest financial contributor to such international organizations. Once again, this shows a strong support to the international system. And it is one of the top 10 countries when it comes to foreign aid provided to developing nations. And by foreign aid, I mean both humanitarian aid for civil wars, but even natural disasters, and development aid. More little-known gems, 20 Nobel Prizes have been awarded so far to Italian scientists and artists. Italy also ranks 8th in terms of number of industrial patents and intellectual properties. We probably can understand how much that matters, because fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your own personal viewpoint, anything that matters and is influential in today's world is copyrighted somehow. And since the Olympics and the Paralympics have just ended, it is also the country that ranks 7th in the all-time Olympic medal tally by number of golds, ahead of much more populous countries. And it has the 6th highest life expectancy globally, on par with Australia, which is a country that made a huge leap, a huge jump in the past 20 years. And another element, this is very, very important. Italy ranks 8th in the International Science ranking. Now, this particular ranking measures the quality but also the quantity of scientific publications at the global level in all scientific fields. And this is the official list of countries, and it is great to see Australia making the top 10 as well. So once again, this means that Italy, besides what we usually associate with the country, besides the land and the culture and the food and the wine, has the means and the relationship as well as the scientific, technological know-how to help shape a post-pandemic world, something that is very much needed in 2020 and 2021.
Brilliant, that's fantastic. And it certainly does seem that there is much more to Italy than what we might originally assume. So in light of that, in light of the things that you've spoken about, and in light of the concept of Italy in the post-pandemic world, what can you say about what you think Italy's place is moving forward in this post-pandemic world?
Again, a very interesting question. This is probably $1 billion question, if not $1 trillion question. We know the world we live in today. It's a pandemic world. It is something that none of us were used to, and hopefully none of us will be used to in the future. Yet, we need to talk about what the country can do within it. Now, first of all, I think that Italy should continue working with its partners, mainly EU and G7 countries, to provide vaccines to countries that need them. We have seen important, significant promises. The G7 has agreed to donate 1 billion vaccines by the end of this year. The EU has promised 200 million additional doses also by the end of this year. Yet, there are heavy delays in both deliveries. This is also partially due to the fact that wealthy nations such as Italy are already delivering third doses, but we need to understand that vaccine solidarity as well as vaccine diplomacy is crucial to create a post-pandemic world. Not only because it helps developing states, it is the right thing to do, but also because it stops the spread of the virus and its many variants. In other words, we need to be there, we need to prepare for the future. Health security capabilities are of paramount importance. And what you see in this image in front of you is the Global Health Security Index score, basically how states were thought they would cope in the case of a pandemic. And as we can see, the United States and the United Kingdom rank first and second, yet we know how tragic their situation has been. The United States in particular is still grappling with most of the difficulties that we saw in the past few months. There are, of course, positive examples as well. Australia is one of the top ranking countries, and when the pandemic unfortunately eventuated, it also coped well, very well. Italy is there somewhere in the middle with other European nations such as Austria and Belgium. And what does all of this tell us? It tells us that there's no use in having a beautiful pandemic plan that works brilliantly on paper. If you do not implement it swiftly and fully, you might as well not have one at all. And this is crucial because experts tell us that future pandemics are not a matter of if, they are a matter of when. They may not be, and we surely hope that they are not going to be as dire as this one, but we keep getting more and more people and the planet is still the same. And to that end, the 6 categories of this Global Health Security Index can probably help us to understand which aspects of our preparedness plans can be improved for the future. So in other words, it is crucial to increase the funding for biomedical research and development, but also to adopt common pandemic plans. There is no use in having a country with a beautiful pandemic plan when its neighboring country is doing something completely different. We know that the virus does not stop at the border. And we also need, as I mentioned before, to share the vaccines and the related technology that we have with developing nations. Secondly, in a post-pandemic world, I think that because of the rather large material capabilities that I mentioned before, Italy should continue to play a role in stabilizing volatile regions with peacekeeping, either alone or with partners. This is the up-to-date map of the Italian Defense Ministry, and these are some of the main missions that Italy will engage into this year, in 2021. And in total, we are talking about 40, precisely 40 international missions for this year, and a range of troops ranging between 6,500 to almost 10,000, depending on the moment of the year. The logic behind being that if you protect civilians, not only you protect lives, but you also stabilize volatile regions, which might prevent more dangerous situations from arising. Third, and this is important when it comes to Australia as well, it is important to foster closer ties with like-minded countries, countries that have similar goals. Now, when we think of cooperation in terms of trade, science, defense, politics, culture, people-to-people links, we are right in assuming that that is already in place with other European countries and with North American countries. There is an ongoing, strong ongoing cooperation with the United States, for example. But this is very much underdeveloped with many Indo-Pacific nations, including Australia. And if we take Australia as an example of how things could be improved between Italy and third parties, we can see that the international science ranking that I mentioned before shows where a nation is stronger, in which scientific fields it is stronger and weaker. And that is great because Italy and Australia have comparative advantages in terms of research in different fields. So cooperation can be increased. The two economies are also very complementary. What we produce and export in Australia is not produced and exported in Italy, as vice versa. Yet the trade growth is still quite quick. The same goes for defense cooperation and research and development, which is quite undervalued. Italy exports what Australia needs, and yet Australia imports it from elsewhere. So in other words, if Italy is able to increase its cooperation with undervalued partners, such as Australia, but also many others, then it stands a better chance to not just advance its own national interest, but the interest of the global community. So if this can be applied to regions where Italy cooperates less, such as the Indo-Pacific, which is the region of the 21st century, then we really are standing a better chance of shaping a post-pandemic world. Fourth, I think that Italy should continue to contribute with the path that has been going on for quite a while, stabilizing volatile regions, but also bolstering a rules-based global order, so that all states know that they are playing by the same rule book. This is particularly important in the past, and has been particularly important in the past 5 years, because we know that as new rising powers gain a new standing globally, they might, but also might not accept the status quo as it is. All of which brings about a renewed importance, a renewed significance of global cooperation, which can be embodied by the international organizations that we are familiar with, the UN, the EU, and so forth. So once again, the logic behind is that regional stability brings about economic prosperity, which is not just something good for developed nations, but it is a fair and safe path for developing nations. And once again, the international law should be the guiding principles of this path here. Now, all of this sounds great, and why should it not? It is a great agenda, not just for the present, but also for the future. However, in order to do so, Rome needs to address some key issues, and some of us might be familiar with some of these issues. First of all, the economy. We mentioned that it's a very large economy, and it is, of course, the 8th largest, but it is a very large economy that doesn't grow. It has a very high public debt. There is a strong bureaucratic fabric, and the funding for research is too small. So now while we are talking in these very months, Prime Minister Draghi is managing a post-pandemic recovery plan that is worth almost 400 billion Australian dollars. Now that will be an unmissable chance for Italy to implement very much needed economic reforms. From a political viewpoint, Italy needs greater governmental stability. It has had 12 governments since 2000, which is one more than Australia, which is already far too many. Thirdly, there is a problem with the country's population. It needs to tackle the demographic crisis that has been unfolding for quite a while. It has a shrinking population, and that is not going to be sustainable in the mid-term. But at the same time, there is a so-called brain drain of young, skilled Italians, and Consul General Andrea De Filippo alluded to this before. Fourth, there are geopolitical tensions, which the ambassador mentioned before. She mentioned, rightly so, of course, Libya in the Mediterranean, but also Iraq in the Middle East. It's probably a little known thing that after the US withdraws from Iraq, Italy will become the head of the international missions there. But also it needs to be acutely aware that China's growing influence in the EU needs to be welcomed, but needs to be welcomed with awareness. Lastly, cooperation, I think, is the word here, the key word of this conference. No matter how large and significant your country's capabilities are, there is no point in the 21st century in trying to achieve global goals by yourself, by acting alone. There is much, much more power if this happens in coordination with like-minded states, both traditional partners, the ones that I mentioned before, and the new ones, the ones in the Indo-Pacific, and Australia should be one of the key players in this renewed climate of cooperation. With that said, and this is something that also the ambassador mentioned before, Italy is the annual president of the G20 meeting this year. And this will be a great opportunity to initiate this important agenda, not just by itself, but also with its traditional and hopefully new future partners. So this concludes the central part of the conference. On my part, thank you very much for your attention. And now again, over to you, Talia.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gabriele. It's very interesting. So thank you very much for your talk. You've given us lots of food for thought. As you explained at the beginning, we have with us today Ambassador Ferdinando Nelli Feroci, President of the Italian Institute of International Affairs. And I was wondering, Ambassador, if you could share with us what you think Italy's main challenges for the future are.
Yes, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Abbondanza for his invitation, and also like to congratulate him for his presentation. Brilliant, articulate, quite complete. I'd like to thank Dr. Guarneri, Director of the Italian Institute, Cultural Institute in Sydney, and Ambassador Francesca Tavioli, whom I'm seeing with pleasure on my PC today. And I'd like to congratulate all of you for this initiative. Now, as for your question, I think that many before me, including Ambassador Tavioli, Dr. Abbondanza, mentioned the impact of COVID-19 on Europe and on Italy in particular. It must be recalled that Italy was the first country in Europe after China to be hit by COVID-19. And it was a very heavy impact, in particular, on our economy. GDP went down something like 8% in 2020. And there were a number of activities that were suspended because of COVID, because of measures adopted to contain contagions. And now this situation is looking much better. The estimate for GDP growth for this year ran at around 6%, which is a data that shows two things in particular. First, that our economy is live and doing well altogether. And second, that the measures that were adopted by the government, not only in Italy, but particularly in Italy, to contain the social consequences of COVID were effective and efficient. Now, we are now faced with one major challenge, if I may say so, which is now the implementation of the national
recovery and resilience plan. It was not mentioned explicitly by none of the speakers that intervened before me, but one of the major achievements of the European Union was the adoption of the largest ever plan to support member states in their efforts towards recovery, which made available for member states an amount of something like 750 billion euros. By the way, funded by the emission of common bonds guaranteed by the EU budget, something very exceptional and very new. And Italy is the main and the biggest beneficiary of this plan, with an amount of something like 209 billion euros, partly in grants, partly in loans. Italy is the biggest beneficiary, as I said. A national plan for recovery and resilience has been adopted by the government. It took some time. It was not an easy task to distribute these resources among the several sectors of the economy that demanded assistance. Now we are entering into the phase of the execution of this plan, of the implementation of this plan. So we have to show our partners in the Union that we are capable to spend this money, to spend it well, and according to the conditions that have been agreed by the Italian government with the Commission, the European Commission. And these interventions of a financial nature, which are spread over 6 missions, I want to mention all of them because it would be too much detail, must be accompanied by the adoption and implementation of a certain number of reforms that have been mentioned, I think, at the end of this intervention by Dr. Abbondanza, which go from the reform of the justice sector to the public administration and bureaucracy, to schools and universities, and to the sector of competition. They're all measures of reform that are needed to increase and improve the competitiveness of the Italian economy, but they are also a condition for Italy to receive the money that were promised by the European Union. And I see this probably as the main challenge for the country. 2026, which is the year of the end of this program. The conclusion of this program is scheduled for 2026. As someone said, I think we can now count on a very prestigious and internationally recognized Prime Minister. He is at the head of a very large coalition, quite unique in terms of dimension, something like a national unity government with one single exception. It's a unique condition. So far, it's functioning. So far, the government is working well, and I hope that this will continue. So this is my very first reaction to your question. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and sharing that perspective. Much appreciated. So, Gabriele, would you like to add anything to anything that the ambassador said?
Thanks, Dalia. Thank you very much, Ambassador Nelly Feroci. That was very, very insightful. And I do agree. The post-pandemic recovery plan that I mentioned before, I mentioned it, the value of it in Australian dollars rather than in euros, is likely to be the most significant challenge for the near future. And that will also show the path ahead for the country. So to get it right is of paramount importance. I do agree wholeheartedly with this analysis, and to that I have nothing else to add. Talia, I don't know if you want to hear some of the questions or over to you.
No problem. Thank you very much. We'll open up presently to the Q&A. But first of all, we have Senator Giacobbe with us. And I wanted to ask if he wanted to share his thoughts or give us an impression of his perspective of Italy's place in this post-pandemic world.
Yes, good evening. I'm talking to you from the Italian Senate. It's a very hot day out there, but thankfully inside is air conditioning. first of all, compliment for this initiative. I think we need to talk a little bit more about how we continue to promote Italy to be a leader in the world, because we can say whatever, but Italy with Made in Italy is certainly shown leadership of Italy in the world in terms of goods, services, and we want to continue like this. And it's true that and Italy's got all the ingredients in this recipe to continue to play a very important role of leadership, including the management of the pandemic crisis. And correctly, Dr. Abbondanza mentioned the comment of Fauci. And Dr. Ambassador Nelly Feroci, I think mentioned very great important point that the ambassador Tardioli did at the beginning, which is what is going to be the challenge in the near future for Italy, which is definitely the PNRR, the plan, the recovery plan, the next generation EU of European Union, which is basically guided by two principles that are very, very important in the way how funds are being allocated. On one side, and I thank Ambassador Tardioli for having mentioned this at the beginning, trying to overcoming inequalities in the society, inequalities in the country. And the second is to better use the resources that Italy has got. And Gabriele gave us a very good example of those resources that might have not been used well. And I'm thinking about the thousands of little borgis, the thousands of little places around Italy. For example, if we talk about tourism that have never been used, those resources have never been accessed or have not produced the sort of economic outcomes that they could. You see, I believe that the Italians will continue to be the leaders in the world because Italians produce quality, Italians are innovative, Italians are resilient, and please let me say, Italians do it better. So we have started the process of reforms. Today in the Senate, we will be discussing and approving the justice reform. And my question to Dr. Abbondanza is what needs to be done in the future in Australia, in the near future in Australia, to keep on furthering the promotion of the Made in Italy, the promotion and the assistance to the infrastructure companies that are already present in the countries and can do much more, the promotion of tourism, both ways, inbound and outbound, the promotion of investments in Italy, which are basically some of the core aspects of the presence of Italy in Australia. And in particular, how can we assist this promotion, this position of leadership of Italy in Australia with the role of cultural and social exchanges? So how social and cultural exchanges can help further the position of leadership of Italy in Australia and in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Giacobbe. Very interesting intervention and also a very significant question. Now, I do not want to steal the spotlight because this question might have been posed to Ambassador Francesca Tardioli as well. I'll give you my own 2 cents. Greater reciprocal awareness is needed. What we think we know as Italians about Australia is usually limited to the country, to the land, to the beaches. And what Australians usually think of when it comes to Italy is something that we mentioned at the beginning of the conference: the country, the lifestyle, the luxury brands, the food and the wine. There is rather more besides on both accounts, both in Italy and in Australia. And we should be grateful to have diplomats such as Ambassador Francesca Tardioli and Consul General Andrea De Filippi, because they are doing an excellent job at shedding light on these little known facets, if you will. So greater reciprocal awareness, I think, is really, really important. Then again, of course, if we are able to update, to elevate the bilateral relationship to a further level, such as that of a potential strategic partnership, that's the ideal next step that comes to my mind, then now that would make things even easier from an institutional viewpoint. I hope that these answer your question, but if anyone else wants to jump in, please.
I have a comment perhaps to address the many questions that I see popping up in the chat concerning the future perspective for the youngest generations. when it comes to Italy, but broadly speaking to, you know, the efforts that the international community is putting together to overcome, to put finally the pandemic on our backs. And it's true that there isn't a specific pillar within the National Reconstruction and Recovery Plan devoted to the young, unemployment between the youth, in the youth segment, but it's a sort of a cross-cutting element. What I mean is that if the PNR is implemented correctly, then it will really open pave the way for a much more inclusive society, including in concerning work opportunities. It's really a huge challenge, as you have very eloquently said, but it's also the only opportunity in a century. You know, the pandemic is the one in a century challenge, and this is the one in a century pandemic for Italy, but more broadly the all states, I would dare to say, to transition effectively to a much more sustainable model of development. Otherwise, I'm sorry to say that, and I'm convinced about what I'm about to say. Otherwise, we won't have any problem in the future, because the next generation will just inherit a deperished planet with more inequalities everywhere, with conflicts everywhere, and this is not the way we want to go. Certainly I don't want, even because I have 2 kids and I want to leave them with a better planet and with an acceptable and decent future.
Thank you all. Very interesting discussion and very interesting points raised within the discussion, talking about those country relations and also the situation in Italy. Some of the comments as well within the chat have spoken about the brain drain in Italy and what can be done in relation to that serious issue. And particularly someone has noted that the brain re-entry program rather, and needing to bring that back and possible changes to that program. And there is also another comment about sustainability within fashion in Italy, and could Italy be a leader in this space? So I'm wondering if anybody would like to make any comments in relation to those.
I might jump in with reference to the first one. I do not pretend to be a fashion expert, so I will keep my mouth shut with reference to the second question. But as an academic, I suppose that yes, I can say a couple of things with reference to the brain drain. It has, I think, always been a traditional feature of the Italians to travel abroad. Historically speaking, we are famous for being sailors and explorers and cartographers as well. So that is not news. That has always happened. The opposite, however, does not happen in a similarly frequent fashion. And that is because we all know that there are some issues that Italy should address if Italy wants to have foreign researcher within Italy itself. First of all, the language used to be a problem. The second language, it is, you might have found people speaking French or Spanish before English. And that is great in a European perspective, but in an international perspective, English is very much needed, even in academia, especially maybe in academia. And this is changing. Also, we need to have degrees that are entirely provided in English. Now, again, this was not the case. This was not something that was in place a couple of decades ago. It is increasingly becoming a common feature, but it is still a very rare occurrence. And thirdly, we need to have lessened, a weakened bureaucratic framework. It is difficult to start a new life in Italy if you are used to a very, very light bureaucracy, such as the one that we have here in Australia, for example. Other countries have an even more complicated bureaucracy, fellow European nations that I will not name, of course, but there is much room for improvement. So if Italy can do these things, and the pandemic plan that we have mentioned so very often today, if the pandemic plan is going to be implemented in full, then there is no reason for which Italy should not be able to host as many researchers inside Italy as it sends outside. Thanks.
Now, I apologize for being forced to leave you. Thank you again, and congratulations for the quality of this event, which was really exceptional. In particular to you, Gabriele Abbondanza. I'm very happy to have met you, at least on our PCs, to Francesca Tadioli for intervening frequently and with very interesting intervention. Thank you all very much, and bye-bye.
That was great. Thank you very much to Ambassador and President Ferdinando Nelli Feroci. Now, unfortunately, we have basically finished our time. I see that there are so many interesting and insightful questions in the chat. So if any of you would like to continue this conversation, please do send us an email. We're always very keen to talk about these things. I have a very long name and surname, but the easiest way is simply to Google my name and you will find my contacts on the internet. The same thing goes for all of our speakers. So I would like to thank them, all of you, the speakers and the guest speakers, for this brilliant and really, really interesting evening. Thank you very much to Talia for moderating all of this. And again, thank you very much to all of you who have decided to participate in yet another webinar. I do hope to see you very soon face to face. And in the meantime, take care. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.